Hello, you guys. Good evening. I see there's a couple of people on here, and if you can hear me, just let me know that you can hear me talking, because I know that there's some time I've done this before where I've started talking and no one could hear me. So I'm just going to type this up really quick. Oh, yes. Hello. Yay. Okay. Wonderful. I'm so glad. Okay, I absolutely love doing these webinars. I love even more in person, and thank you. I'm going to do some more of these because I love seeing parents just even face to face to help them through whatever it is that's going on with their child. And I think I love it most because I am a mom who had a child who was struggling, and to be able to navigate through that, it takes a village. But I know as a parent, to be able to encourage another parent to say, there's hope and you've got this and we can do this and it doesn't have to be this way, I think is really, really important. And I think that goes a long, long way. And, I got to tell you, when I was in the middle of it, I didn't think that there was a way out. I would say that I definitely thought that this is just kind of how it was going to be, and I needed to figure out how to navigate a child who wasn't necessarily behaving the way that I thought, like his older brother was. And of course you hear all the stories about, middle children and things like that. I hadn't made him a middle child quite yet when we started noticing his struggles, but really my biggest heart was to figure out, well, why? Why is he doing this? So I could take some action steps forward to help him through it. And until I had that found out, it was really difficult for me to know what to do. Although I tried a lot of things, you guys. I did a lot of parenting classes. We made sticker charts. I needed a lot of Jesus. So I even did some courses at my church to figure out, what can I do to help this kid? Because not only was he not listening well, unable to focus, having problems transitioning, he wasn't learning well. And that's when I really started to discover that he needed some help. And all of the things were kind of coming together into one to be like, all right, this is really what we need to do. So, excuse me. So now I say he's a little boy. This isn't even him. This is my little boy who's 8. Landon is now 12 and he's almost as tall as I am, and he's doing so amazing. You would never even know where he started life. So I'm just here to give other parents hope and to help them understand what's going on. And that's my hope behind this, is to give parents not only an understanding, because I know that there's some people on here whose kids might have already had a diagnosis, or there's some people that are like, well, it sounds like sensory. I don't really know what that means. Or, you're just starting to explore it. I know that many parents thought sensory is more of like a fantasy diagnosis, and it was just, behavior, and they needed some discipline. I've heard that. Don't worry, I've heard everything, and I'm sure you have too. What's going on with your kid. And it just didn't make sense to me. I'm like, my kid's not sleeping through the night, not learning, not because he needs a spanking, right? That doesn't make sense. But there's something going on inside of his body. So I want to be able to share this with you guys, help you understand him a little bit deeper, your child, and then really just navigating what to do about it to move forward and know that there is hope, and you're not a terrible parent, because I know that feeling of Googling at night and wondering like, oh man, what am I doing here? Like what's wrong, and what's wrong with me, and all the things that run through our head as parents. We can jump into a rabbit hole really, really quickly and get to the bottom of it and just sit there and be, just in our own heads worrying about, something that we did wrong. So I don't want you to do that either. We are our own people, and we also have our own little nervous system. And if you haven't heard me talk before, I talk a lot about the brain and the nervous system and how it has to process information. And this is probably my favorite poster at saying you live your life through your nervous system. Whatever's going on inside that nervous system, it's your filter and it's your lens. Everything has to be processed through that thing. And I mean, every single emotion, everything you taste, feel, touch, smell, everything's got to come through that nervous system to be sent up to your brain, for your brain to process information, for it to make really good decisions, and then tell your body what to do. And this communication system, it seems very complicated, I'm sure, because, we look at neuroscience and functional MRIs and all the things of like all the things to understand with the brain. But when you really take a step back and look at the bigger picture of what's going on, that nervous system is running the show, and the brain has to get information from somewhere. It's not always that brain making, the errors where we want to give it so much credit. The information has to come through those superhighways to our brain. And there's often times where we're probably all sitting in the same situation, looking at the same computer screen and having very different feelings, and, having had probably very different days and very different perceptions. It's really all inside of that nervous system. So to really give, a good understanding of what's happening, we need to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. And once you see it, it's going to be really hard to break the body down into, into parts or into symptoms and conditions when you can see it as a whole and understand how interrelated it is. So I'm going to start big picture before I start, talking a little bit more about what's going on and why. But when you're looking at your nervous system, its job really is to perceive what's going on everywhere. Internal environment, external environment. It's got to coordinate all that information and then decide what to do about it. That's that behavior piece. And I, of course, bolded a few of these words here because that's typically where we're seeing the struggle in our kids with their perception, with their coordination, and really with that behavior. And I've got to tell you, that input equals output. We see that output, we see that behavior, and we're like, oh man, what is happening? Well, it's happening when it reached the brain, and that's where it was being processed. And that's what we have to really look at in order to understand why that output is the way that it is and what we can do to help them with it. Because it's, let's be honest, it's typically that dang output that we're pretty upset about, or feeling like there's something else going on. And our brain is constantly making its own inner reality. That nervous system of yours, the way the information is coming through, your brain has its own inner reality. And it's very different, yours and mine, and probably your spouse's and your child's and your teachers and their doctor. Everyone's got a different perception. Everyone's got a different inner reality, but it's all brought in through those senses. And I know those top 5 senses that I have listed on there. We're talking about vision, hearing, taste, smell, touch. We often know that those senses can be very altered with our children or even adults. I just had a conversation with a patient who doesn't like to touch cotton, just like I don't like to touch cotton. That is a touch that I don't want to touch. And I'm talking about cotton balls. But we know with our kids, they might be very sensitive to touch. Things might feel really painful, or, they really want that, that tight hugging touch. They need that input. And we've had a lot of kids, we have a variety of the two. It just kind of depends on the day. Some of the other ones that I'm going to be talking about is your enteric sense and your proprioception. So enteric is really, how do I feel inside? How did this thing make me feel? How does my tummy feel? Does that make my throat feel tight? That's an enteric sense of what's going on. And a lot of times that's altered, or when it's at least reaching the brain, they don't know how to tie that together because there's that disconnect there. And instead they're acting out when they have to go to the bathroom, or, when they have a tummy ache, or when they felt really nervous and their chest and their throat is tight. And then proprioception and balance is really your sense of where you at in time and space. It has a lot to do with the way that we coordinate and move our body. And those are big time senses that are sending information back to our brain. When our kids were really little and babies, we paid really close attention to motor milestones, right? We would know if our kid is, hitting their motor milestones or not. And that's that motor sense. And that's what was developing the brain. We know motor milestones are on track, the brain's on track, everything's good. And I got to tell you, I didn't really pick up right away with my son that those motor milestones were so far off, because they weren't that far off. He was just a little bit slower to do things. And I just thought, I carry him everywhere. He's fine. Not realizing how much that integrates into the brain. and how important that is. And our brain's very movement driven. It needs that movement. I'm going to show you a couple slides here in a little bit and how that gets off in that movement sense. But really, when you look at that nervous system and that filter, our nervous system has two modes of operation that it can be in. We really want to balance between these two, but often we can move over into fight or flight. And that fight or flight activation, I'm sure you heard of this before, it's that sympathetic nervous system. It can be such a wonderful thing, right? And I know I'm saying the positive thing first. That thing can be great. You need to run from a bear. There's something really stressful. You just need to, like avoid an accident. You need to exercise. We've got to activate that fight or flight response. That sympathetic nervous system needs to turn on. It needs to take all of the energy that you have and move it out to the limbs, out to the muscles to run, flee, fight, right? Exercise, get away from danger. What also happens with that when that fight or flight response is activated, all of our senses that I just talked about, they're all turned up. They're all on high alert. Our vision, the eyes are dilated. The hearing is, we're just listening for whatever, if we're running from whatever might be coming our way. Tactile, that touch is turned up because we've got to be real agile to get through wherever we're running from. And we'll start to see all of those turning up along with your heart rate, your blood pressure. There's about 1,200 chemicals that are dumped throughout that body to change the physiology of every single cell. If you remember, that nervous system controls every single cell inside that body, and they all have to respond appropriately. And that's a great thing to have as long as we don't live there. So when we start to live there, and when that fight or flight response is activated, we're very impulsive and we're very reactive. When I talk about our flipping and our lid analogy, and if any of you guys have been on here when I talk about that, we've got this brain and we've got this wonderful lid on the front of our brain. That's our prefrontal cortex that helps us with our logical, rational, reasonable thought. It's the only thing that, we have outside of other mammals that makes us human. It helps us pre-plan. There's executive functioning happening up here in this prefrontal cortex. It's not fully developed, until the mid-20s, a little later in boys, but that thing needs to be on. When we have our sympathetic nervous system where we're going into fight or flight, the lid is off. Your amygdala is taking over. That hindbrain makes us impulsive and reactive. We're not really paying attention necessarily to the details around us because we're taking in everything around us so quickly. So kids that live in fight or flight, and many of our kids do, who are typically on here, there's so much of that fight or flight activation. Our inner sense of reality has been altered into everything's a threat. Right? Touching's a threat. My socks are a threat. My teacher's a threat. School's a threat. My brothers, my sisters, going to bed, eating food. That's all tends to be a threat when that fight or flight system is activated. And over time, the more we start to trigger that, if you remember, our kids are wiring and developing right now. And what we don't want to have is a system that's wired for stress and it's wired to activate that fight or flight response because we're not learning. We're not logical. Our brain and our prefrontal cortex isn't engaged and able to learn and take in that information the way you and I might think of, like, wow, we're sitting here in the same situation and you're freaking out. What's going on? Well, their lid's off. They're in that fight or flight response. And then the reverse of it, which cannot be on unless that sympathetic nervous system is turned off, is our parasympathetic nervous system. That's the calming. That's the healing, resting, digesting side of our nervous system. And it's on at night. Should be. That's when it should be on, is when we're sleeping. Our eyes are closed. The body's repairing from the stress of the day. It's relearning all of the things that were happening during the day. One of the coolest experiments that when they started to figure this out was when a rat, sorry, PETA, but had just been learning a maze. And he fell asleep and they didn't take the electrodes off his head. They watched him sleep and he was relearning the maze or the map that he had done while he slept. And it's just such a cool thing. But our brains are just so wired for amazingness and to be able to respond to our environment, not when our nervous system is seeking or seeing our environment as a threat all the time. So I'm going to talk about how to get out of fight or flight as well, because I know you're probably like, oh yeah, I'm there. But also people that get stuck in this parasympathetic nervous system, this is what they look like. They're a little lethargic. They're probably depressed. They're a lot more disconnected. They don't want to do anything. They're really tired all of the time. And we can get stuck in both. When fight or flight feels like it's exhausted, parasympathetic takes over, and it's a very exhausted place to be. And we'll start to see I've got this balance here, that's going on. Once one's on, the other one's off. And I wish I could move this off of the top of here. I'm sorry about that. But I'm showing your nervous system and all of the organs and glands that it controls. And on this side, you can see that a lot of this parasympathetic side of your nervous system is controlled near that brain and near that brain stem, and with one nerve that I'm going to talk about a little bit later called your vagus nerve as a high control. And I know you can't see this over here, but there's another spinal cord and all sorts of connections going on to our fight or flight side of our organs. It's very, very opposite and very different from each other. And I know a lot of people are like, wow, my kid doesn't sleep. They're always in fight or flight. Yes, unfortunately, and we need to be able to calm that down in order for them to have a prefrontal cortex that's engaged, so they can now start taking in their environment at a better, more calm, organized fashion. And that's really what was going on with my kid. And he was a little bit more that parasympathetic. He was a little bit more disconnected. He had a hard time learning. And I just didn't know, once again, that this made sense with his nervous system. Instead, I was taking him all sorts of places like vision therapy, to speech therapy, to have him evaluated at a brain balance center to say, all right, help me with all of these pieces, what's going on? And when I couldn't get an answer, once again, as to why, I had a really hard time actually doing the care plan that they had put together after the assessment, because I didn't understand, what's this going to do to influence and help him, and why did this get there in the first place? And one of the things that we look at with that nervous system as chiropractors is stress that gets stuck inside of that system and keeps us in that fight or flight. We call it a subluxation. What that really just means is neurological interference, stress that is keeping our body and our senses and our living our lives through an altered perception. And that's this big word in the center. And I know this is not, depending on what kind of device you're on, if you can see these other words, we're talking about what keeps us stuck there and feed that cycle. So you might have that stuck point, but then what's going on around you in the environment that might be keeping you there or feeding that cycle? Because there's often times where people have a subluxation, they're subluxated, there's an altered sense of reality, but their environment is beautiful. They eat organic food. They're, very calming. Parents are fantastic. There's not a lot of arguing in the home. There's this ideal environment. They're like, I don't understand what's going on. Well, you're not feeding and fueling this subluxation and this stress point, but it's there. And it's something that needs to be removed in order for their brain and body to process their life better. So when you're looking here, the forms of stress that'll feed it, it says chemical stress, physical stress, and emotional stress. We call them the 3 T's: thoughts, traumas, and toxins. The more we have of this, the more it's going to perpetuate this cycle. And this says interference, irritation, inflammation. And that's really what it causes inside of our body. One thing I didn't mention when I was talking about fight or flight is that immune system gets turned down, digestive system gets turned down. But in your immune response, what turns up is that inflammatory response, because you're ready for an injury, you're ready to be wounded. And a lot of these kids, and even adults, they'll, like, oh man, there's just systemic or chronic inflammation, things are bothering them, their brain's irritated or inflamed. Yes, this is part of that process that will do that. And if you don't leave that fight or flight response, your brain, and I've done another webinar, which is one of my favorite ones, where we looked at what happens when there's inflammation inside of the brain and what happens to those neural pathways. So that's a really fun one that I got to do. I guess I probably 3 or 4 months ago, but if you're registered for these webinars, you can always go back through some of the older ones where I talk about that and really look at those neural pathways with mood and anxiety and depression and how our body handles that stress. One of the biggest questions, of course, once again, people want to know, well, where does that subluxation, where does that stress come from? How does it get stuck there, especially if you do have a great environment? Some people are like, oh yeah, man, our environment's pretty stressful. Granted, we've lived through 2020 and 2021. What's to say about that? But there's some people that are thinking like, I don't know what's going on. Where did this start? And I've got 7 steps laid out here. I know that I want to explain each one of these so you can read them and be like, wait, what? What's going on inside of the body is really, really important, and it can start at conception. And I know moms, once again, I already said this, we blame ourselves and we can just go to the bottom of that rabbit hole, but that was something that I needed to know to make, connect all of those dots, because I had a stressful pregnancy with him. I felt great, but emotionally it was very stressful. We had just moved to Idaho. It was 2008. I didn't know a soul. I opened up this practice. We're 600 miles away from closest family, not a friend in sight. I was living in an apartment that I didn't really love with weird neighbors. It was a very, very stressful time. And emotionally, and even just physiologically, my nervous system, you get your mother's nervous system, is what I'm going to say. They're getting your bloodbath of your emotions, of your hormones, of whatever's going on inside of your body. That's what the baby is getting. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to come out exactly like you, but it can really set the stage for a child, if they have any of these next 7 things or 6 things that are going on, to really just build upon. And there's some people that have, they were very, very challenged during their pregnancy, like worried about loss, which was another thing that I had because I just had a miscarriage previous to that I was worried about losing this pregnancy. So there's a lot of emotional components to what was going on. And I'm not a very calm person either, too. So I'm very excited about everything that I do. And he doesn't have that side of him, but he definitely had some more of that stress component to him. And the second thing that we'll start to see is there's some stress that's happening during the pregnancy or during the delivery, during the time of, you might have had this beautiful, wonderful pregnancy, but they got to get to the outside world. There is a physical stress that happens during that time. Oh, excuse me. And some of the research has even shown, not even done by chiropractors, but in 2015, they looked at babies to say, all right, what happens during this birth process? And they had looked at neurological interference post-birth, and they found that 99 out of 100 infants had some neurological interference, some level of subluxation inside of their body. And they could look at the ones that were less severe and more severe, and very closely related to how their nervous system was operating in less stress mode or in a higher level of stress. And I've got to tell you, I'm going to show you a video next of a cesarean section. And I know that it's not always fun for people to watch, but it was very eye-opening to me about what can go on. And my little guy, he was a home birth. He came very fast, and I didn't know that was such a stressor on his body either. And often what they'll have is, problems nursing, problems latching. They're usually stressed. They're colicky. They're not digesting their food as well. They might be, some are diagnosed with GERD, some are not. But if that still is not taken care of, if you still have that subluxation there, despite, wonderful breast milk and moms that, usually pulling their hair out to decide what they should eliminate from their diet instead of looking at their child's nervous system, they can have a very stressed toddler and a 2-year-old. If they get their first tooth and those ear tubes can't drain, it's usually the first ear infection. You're looking at antibiotics, sometimes ear tubes, and then we've got some auditory processing going on with their ability to hear. And when they're asked to sit still in school and learn is where we really start to see that stuck piece, and we really start to see some of that sensory coming out. And that was with my little guy, was about between the ages of 3 to 5, and was supposed to go to kindergarten. We're like, there's something else going on, and I need to know what happens, because it continues to progress into being exhausted, anxious, depressed teens, which is a lot of what we're dealing with today in the office. I think that, this whole COVID and shutdown just in masks just really kind of pushed a lot of the teens over the edge with that. And then they'll turn into, burnt out, stressed out adults. Your body can only handle so much stress for so long. So much of that sympathetic nervous system stimulation without enough parasympathetic, rest, heal, digest, we start to get really, really burned out and really, really tired. So I'm going to move to this next slide, and I hope you guys can, if this video doesn't play, I have it queued up on my YouTube channel. I'm going to share my screen because it kind of freaked out on me and told me that you couldn't watch this, this content. I promise you I've watched this 100 times, and it was adult content apparently. So let me just make sure that this is going to play, and if it's not, it was giving me that warning. Hang on a second. Excuse me. Let's see if you guys can see this. Yeah, age restricted. Okay. All right. We are going to share our screen and we're going to watch it from here.
Oh, there you go, fella.
Come on, buddy.
All right. Years of a girl. Years of a girl. Make you cute for the camera.
Oh, he's back. You did good.
There you go.
All right.
Big old testicles.
All right. I'm going to try to get out of this here and go back to my...
Yeah.
Well, you sure have my big head here. Yeah, that was the problem.
Yeah, it sure was the problem. Hang tight. All right. Am I back?
Idaho homeowners.
Oh.
Do you want to know a secret your utility?
We're closing out of that. All right. Could you guys see that? I don't know if my screen share works, but the first time I saw that, because we've had, yeah, okay, good. I'm glad you could see it. I know it's not the funnest thing to watch, but I've watched that over and over again. And one of the first things we started doing when I started getting this advanced training was looking at that birth process and looking at what cesarean sections can do to children, because you know that you would never allow anybody to touch your child like this after birth. You know, I mean, we aren't even talking about a child that has touched gravity, that has felt air yet, has no way to protect their head or neck, and we're pulling him out like that. We would never, pick up a kid out of mom's lap, like, oh, let me hold that kid. We wouldn't do that. It's just something we would absolutely never do to a child, not realizing that those delicate fibers of that spinal cord are being affected and altering the senses from day one. And depending on what happened during that, the severity of tugging, pulling, I mean, I hear all sorts of birth stories. That's one of my things that I like to listen to and get some clues, we used Pitocin and there was a lot of, really hard contractions. So we needed an epidural. There was a lot of, help by the doctors or the nurses. Excuse me, there is a lot that can happen during that birth. And when we don't rewind the tape all the way back to say, oh, I can understand where that might come from. I could understand where those altered senses might be. I could understand where we could get into trouble with, let me get back into my slides here. Let me see if you can see my face with this. You might not be able, oh, there I am. And if we don't ever look back to say, how's their body doing? How's their nervous system? How are they processing information other than what they're telling you with their output? A lot of the times you're just always dealing with this altered sense of reality. And it's a really big challenge. I got to tell you what, because those people that say we've been through all these therapies, we've done these parenting classes, we've tried, sleep, whatever. We've tried all of the tricks and all of the tools. Like, those are wonderful tools through a clear nervous system. When that nervous system's clear, and then you start to input all these wonderful things from supplementation to speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, all the wonderful things that we love through a clear nervous system, that brain learns. That new sense of reality is completely different than what it was before. And they can start to integrate now and learn something new that wasn't there before. One of those things it's called dyskinesia, when there's that disconnection of, especially of movement. So when you're looking in that head and neck, which is the biggest piece of that stress component during birth, and even upper back, if they don't get that nice, beautiful squeeze through the vaginal canal, we'll see this area as well. That becomes really affected in our neurological scans. It's misaligned, it's fixated, it's protected. Those are the, some of the babies that are the worst of the worst have the plagocephaly or torticollis, inability to move their head and neck and nurse and latch and even get a flat spot on their head because they're in that protection. Even if you were to, yank on your shoulder now and it's out of place and it's fixated, it's protected, it's inflamed, it's irritated. You don't really want to move it. It hurts. You keep it there and tight and close to your body. Well, think of those delicate muscles and joints next to your nervous system, your brain stem. It's going to even do that tenfold. It's going to make sure that you are not going to injure that any farther, because they have so much to do in their lives that they don't have time for more injuries. we'll see kids once they're up against gravity, it looks a little bit like this. You'll see your kids with the head tilt or forward, chin tucked. You can watch out their positioning, even their eye or their ear, the differences in how their ears are when they look at, head on, and you'll see it reflected in the shoulder. So the eyes can always be at the horizon to look forward and be able to walk straight. But this is just some of the, the clues that we know that there's some upper, what would you call cervical or neck subluxation near this brainstem. This little red organ here is our brainstem that's filtering a ton of information. This is air traffic control for all of that neurological information that's being sent and processed through the brain. And when that's altered, there's definitely an altered sense of reality in that nervous system. And this beautiful bone right here that's in yellow, that's your first cervical vertebra. It holds up your head. That's called the atlas, that holds up the world. This beautiful one is very, very important, and a lot of sensory integration information running through that. And there's some really, really deep proprioceptive fibers that lie inside of there. So when your neck and your head and all of your spinal muscles are moving appropriately and giving feedback to the brain, proprioception to say, here's where I'm at, why this motor sense of your brain is developing, they all have to move appropriately. And what we'll start to see is when there's that altered sense, now your brain doesn't exactly know where the body parts are. The motor sense is off. Proprioception is off. Balance is off. And when we start to run our neurological scans, I might have that picture next. Here it is. We can see where the energy is off there. We can see where that nervous system is really stressed out and locked up and stuck and unable to fully process the information. This is a picture of a little guy from years ago, but he was an emergency cesarean section. And he was 5, and his mom was one of those people that did do everything. She did do all of the therapies and removed all the toxins from their home and did counseling and did everything that she could. And he still had a very altered sense of reality to the point of not being able to get into the private school his siblings had. And she had heard this story of what we did in our office, brought in actually her baby first because she wasn't nursing or latching, and, was really frustrated with that. And then had saw how many sensory kids we were taking care of and said, I have another kid for you to look at. And his story was pretty remarkable. We're grateful for cesarean sections. I'm so grateful. I had a cesarean section as well. My last baby was a complete previa, so he couldn't come through the vaginal canal. They can save our lives. They can save our babies' lives. It's such an amazing, wonderful piece that medicine is there for. But then you've got to look to see, okay, what happened now? We brought this beautiful baby into the world. It had to be stressful. The cord was wrapped around the neck or whatever it was, which was part of Caleb's case. Thank God they saved our lives. Now let's undo some of the stress because they're here and they're alive. And now let's move forward in this direction, not necessarily to, bash C-section, because I know a lot of people think that they're like, oh man, it's just so evil. It definitely is not when it's a life-saving event, when it is sometimes a free choice for people and they don't realize the repercussions later on of like, oh, I just cut them out on the day that I want you to. If they knew all of the information, they just make better choices to know that that had a lot of stress on my baby's body. And now as a parent, you're seeing the repercussions of that. And often you'll start to see not only when that motor sense is off, we'll see the gut is off, the immune system, speech, behavioral, and emotional. And sometimes in that order, a lot of the times in that order, but not always. Sometimes we don't even realize that the motor system is off, which is my little guy. I didn't realize it was off. I didn't realize his gut was just a little bit slower. His immune system had a harder time fighting off things that we got over really quickly. His speech was not quite there. And I thought it was so cute to repeat the words he said wrong until his teacher was like, well, if you never say it right, he's going to keep saying the wrong word. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. I shouldn't do that anymore. Socially, he wanted to disconnect. He didn't want to be around other people. Those senses were up so high. And behaviorally, with that altered sense of reality, it was difficult for him to transition from one thing to the next. I'd have to be like prep him, like, oh man, get Landon in this 8-minute prep to move from this location to this location, right? Like, buddy, dinner's going to be in about 4 minutes. I see you're playing with your cars. We're going to have to put those away and come over to the table. Just it was like exhausting as a parent. And emotionally, he would just have meltdowns, that lid's off. He'd be freaking out on things that we didn't think were freak outable. He also wasn't sleeping through the night. So then I also felt horrendous when I'm woken up. I was at that time nursing another child, being like, buddy, I can't keep waking up with you while I'm starting nursing this guy. Mama's got to sleep. And when we moved houses in 2020, I actually found the camping mat under my bed that I used to have him pull it out and just sleep next to me. I'm like, I'm here for you, pal, but like mom's gotta sleep. And until we were really able to get to the core of this, I got him one of those neurological scans, and I was able to help him is when I took my old style of chiropractic. I know people have their own perceptions of what chiropractors do. You're like, don't you go to them for neck pain, back pains, and and headaches, car accidents, things like that. And sure, you can. It's just so much more than that. And I really couldn't keep talking about structures when I'm looking at the brain and the nervous system and how the body's processing and adapting to their life anymore. So we kind of dumped that old insurance-based pain practice and had opened up this family-based wellness practice to make sure people were living their very best lives. And we just haven't looked back because there's so many wonderful miracles that happen every day in our office, from just even little small wins where we're happy that they start to sit still, they get on the table on their own. Then all of a sudden, mom's like, wow, they went to school without an argument and they changed their socks and they're okay putting on shin guards and playing on a soccer team where before, socks were an enemy. And it's just such wonderful things that you can watch children make this incredible turnaround when their sense of reality isn't so altered and stuck and scared and stressed and everything is, freaking them out. So of course, we want to make sure that their brain and their body is connected. So we get them a scan, and then we start with a series of adjustments to make sure the brain and the body can be calm. And one of the things that we're measuring in those scans is our vagus nerve. And that was the piece I was trying to show you guys on that slide. I'm going to have to change. But that brain-gut connection, that vagus nerve, if you've heard of that before, there's 12 cranial nerves inside of your head. There's 2 that actually leave the cranial vault. And one of them is that vagus nerve. Vagus means wandering. It's got to leave right through here and wander throughout all of your organs and glands and bring feedback to the brain. It's got 9 times more fiber than any other nerve in the body, and it's in charge of that parasympathetic nervous system, the upper 2/3 of the gut and those organs and glands. We need to make sure that vagus nerve is stimulated appropriately, that it's free to move. We found with our adjustments that thing starts turning on. It gets better tone. If you've ever heard people talk about vagal nerve tone, heart rate variability, that's what we're looking at, because it's also running that heart rate as well. And it's really important that vagus nerve is talking to all of those organs and glands and making sure that the body is getting really good, or the brain's getting really good feedback, because if it's not, we're going to start to see one of those 7 things start to occur. And another one of our scans, we'll often see thermography is another scan that we run. We'll start to see inflammation accruing in an area, and that just really means healing. Your body's going to put energy into areas that need to heal, but over time, it'll start to interfere with that autonomic nervous system. And it's called dysautonomia. I know now, hospitals are creating entire wings of people with dysautonomia, not knowing that this can be very easily corrected. Because to them, chiropractors are also, for neck pain, back pain, and headaches, not knowing that it's really helping the nervous system as a whole be able to operate and function better, and keeping the fundamental belief that we have. And I don't know that all medical providers even have this, but we're so in love with the fact that our bodies are designed to be healthy. They're designed to self-heal. They're designed to self-regulate. They work together as a whole, instead of, pulling out one system of the body and just examining the heart or the eyes or the lungs or the throat or the behavior or the social or the emotional. It's such a bigger picture, and there's so much more going on that we need to make sure that nervous system is safe and sound before we start pouring money and time and energy into all of these other components of it. And when you have that fundamental belief, you just know that the body is capable of such amazing things, and you get to see amazing things every single day, and you get to see the body make great changes. I'm going to see if I can get this just a little bit bigger for you guys, because I think that this picture is really cool. From Harvard, where they look at what's the brain's ability to change and how much effort is required to do so. So age is across the bottom there, 2 to 70. Your brain's ability to change is this blue line, and the amount of effort required to do so. Now, I think there's a couple of really beautiful pieces with this. Number one being that your brain always changes. There's a 7-year-old on there, and it's going to require a lot of effort, but it can change. And we see 7-year-olds in our office, not a ton, but we sure do. And they still make a change, especially in that proprioception balance sense when they've lost that. But look at all of this over here in our body's ability to be able to make really huge changes in our youth. I know it feels like you've crossed over this line, right? Those of you that are past that line with me, you're like, oh man, I don't know. Hopefully there's still hope for me. Well, where's my head? I'm going to bring it back. But there is. And when you really look at this, people are like, man, how long is it going to take? What's going to happen? And it just depends, it depends on how much stress is there. It depends on how long it's been there. It depends on how much of those, 7 things I went through that's going on. And what the scan looks like is what really going to depend on all of those pieces to know here's what it's going to do and here's what a change looks like. And then when you live your life through a clear nervous system, oh my gosh, I just can't even tell you how amazing your world can be. I had no idea either. My mom, I'm sure, would have paid anything, didn't have a lot to pay, but anything to change my attitude as a teenager, because my sense of reality was like, ugh, everything's terrible. I'm irritable. I don't talk to you. I've got headaches. And, I was just a miserable teenager. I'm glad I didn't get a teen girl like me, because, man, this would be a fun conversation. I have all boys. But I got to tell you, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to have a clear, calm, controlled, connected, coordinated nervous system, which is the side effects. I know people are like, man, I don't know, if you keep going to that chiropractor, what's going to happen? Wonderful things. That's what's going to happen. Your brain is going to do wonderful things when you're at the chiropractor, is stimulating your brain and your lid to stay on, which is the coolest thing that we found through the research. Is, a lot of people think, okay, we're delivering a chiropractic adjustment. What exactly is happening? Is it changing here in the spine? They found out it changes the brain. It changes that prefrontal cortex, and it actually helps the right and left sides of the brain sync up together. It's both sides of the prefrontal cortex. And that's something that there's, people seek anything to be able to do to sync that brain up, to be able to think more clearly, more confidently, calmer, be more connected and organized. It's a really big deal, and it's a really amazing deal because the body's designed to do it. And when you start to put in that information, that sensory information, man, do those senses change, and the brain changes, and your gut changes, and your immune system changes, all for the absolute better. I know I have on here ask questions. I don't know if people want to stick around and ask any questions in here. I can stick around here, and knowing that you, once you start to know why, then it's so much easier to make better decisions to say, this is what I need to do next. Taking a really good look at their environment so you aren't feeding that subluxation is a really wonderful idea. Removing those 3 T's, the physical, chemical, and emotional stressors that are there. Sometimes it's dang near impossible, but I know that you can do something, which is really great. And one of the things that I didn't really touch on with the physical component of that is gaming. Not moving your body enough is just worse than, falling on the ground for the most part. If you're sitting at a computer, they're in front of a game, they're down on their phone, that is literally worse. Your brain is not getting any movement and feedback at all when you're sitting. I mean, you're getting some, but it's not what you need by any means. It's a long, long stretch. So like gaming is just one thing that we really love to see go. We do scans on adults. So those neurological scans take 10 minutes. They're non-invasive. We get a ton of information at a resting state. And we do them on adults. We love when the whole family can have, the prefrontal cortex on. Everyone kind of heals. And especially, moms, teachers, they tend to hang on to other people's stress a little bit more and have even a little bit of PTSD along with what happened. I know for me, I kind of hung onto that stress a lot more. And knowing that my nervous system is in the best shape it's ever been in, which seems kind of crazy to say, I have more energy now than I did in my 20s, is just absolutely wild. But watching my scans and making sure that I'm always staying, I didn't show this scan, but it's called the green box with your body's ability to heal is pretty incredible and pretty important. Here's my Landon now. He's not really happy always about me showing his face, and I just loved this picture of him. He's such a cool kid, very coordinated now, where I didn't think he was going to be able to play any sports, caught up on his learning, his speech. You wouldn't ever know that he had any of this going on. His eyeballs lined back up. I don't even know if I mentioned he had a wandering eyeball. He sleeps through the night. He's thoughtful. There's just so many wonderful pieces, and I would see glimpses of them all the time in him. They just were very short glimpses, and when you can get this like big picture, this window, and clearing up his nervous system, and just watch his little spirit come out and his soul, it's just so fun. So sometimes I have a little QR code on here. I don't this time. There is a link to click on. If you can't click on that link or copy that link, you always tell them that you've come and watched one of my webinars. And we've got a special VIP pass for you. Very complicated cases, and we do take on a lot, nonverbal, feeding tube, all sorts of cases of autism. Those complicated cases are $300. Anybody coming in off the streets is $189. When you watch a webinar, you come to one of my workshops, you get a VIP pass for $100. So tell them that you've watched it, and then you want to bring your child in to get checked, or yourself get a neurological scan. We would absolutely love to have everybody living their best life, which is what we're here for, is for those of us that are here on this earth that want to make a difference, to serve our purpose, that we can, and we have so much more energy to give back when it's not stuck in stress. So thank you guys so much for joining me. You know what? Insurance does not cover what we do, Jennifer. We tried for a very long time, about 7 years, and they didn't. Neurological based proactive care was not being covered. So we aren't in network with any insurances, but most people use their HSA or FSA plan to be able to come in and pay for care. And what we'll do after that scan is sit down and say, okay, here's what's going on, here's the plan, here's the cost, here's the visit number, and help people pick a comfortable financial option to be able to bring their child in. And that seems to work far better than insurance denials and people getting surprise bills after they're done with care. That was no fun at all. So, and I do know that Medicaid, for people that are in network, they may or may not do neurological based scans. They'll cover 6. So it's kind of like one of those things where, like, thanks for, barely skimming the surface of what I have going on. It's really frustrating. I'm sorry. Thank you, Mikey. I appreciate you guys being on here. If there's any other questions, I can stick around and answer them. I'm so happy to do that. And yes, and parents, you know what? There's hope. And we've got so many, I've got a wall of testimonials of children that are living such a better life. And as parents, we feel better as well. Thank you for answering. Yes, I know. We do too. With C-sections, do you find that migraines is a common issue? You know what? There's a variety of things that happen with my C-section babies. I've had migraines with people that are vaginal birth, but yes, and even seizures, epilepsy tends to be somebody that had a very stressful birth and delivery, unfortunately, and that kind of sets the tone for that. As well, but we do find children with migraines, and that upper cervical is so vital. People that have any sort of like chronic headache here, it's usually where we find the neurological interference. Fortunately or unfortunately, it's always wonderful when you find it, because then you say, great, we can help remove this stress and restore that nervous system. When you don't find anything is one of those things you're like, oh, you got to look deeper. There's something else going on than what we're seeing here at the surface. I didn't start with you, Brandon. You read it. Oh, I know. Oh, no, I haven't read that book. It didn't start with you. Is that a parenting book? I thought people do ask me, like, why didn't I start here? And I'm like, I don't know, sister. I know. People don't know to come to a chiropractor first. It saves a lot of time and energy, I gotta tell you what. I'll have to look that up, Mikey. I don't know that one. Well, thank you guys for coming on here on a Tuesday evening and almost 8 p.m. Hopefully your littles are in bed. And, inherited family trauma. Yes, I would love that. Absolutely. Thank you, you guys. I so appreciate it. I don't know why I'm losing my voice. I did a lot of talking today. Shocking. I talk to people all day long for a living. You're so welcome. Absolutely. And